My name is Bob Gardner, and I have the privilege of overseeing SCS's solid waste management business and their operations, which are located throughout the country. Those services include environmental engineering and consulting practices, construction, operation and maintenance, and energy services. We employ nearly 1,000 engineers, scientists, technicians, construction professionals, field and administrative staff, serving clients throughout the United States and abroad. Today's webinar will address what I think are two hot topics facing the solid waste industry. The first one dealing with recycling and the stresses that are facing the industry due to a number of global events, the most notable being obviously COVID-19, as well as the China sword. And the challenges really that are facing our clients. With me today are two leaders in SCS, Leonard, who serves as our national practice leader for what we call sustainable materials management. For those of you who don't know, sustainable materials management really recognizes that the materials that we currently discard actually have value. And that practice looks at ways to optimally reduce, to reuse, or to recycle materials that are discarded. This includes waste and material recovery facility kind of studies, waste characterization, planning services, material processing. Michelle is a past president of SWANA and is a recognized leader in the sustainable management arena. Vita Quinn directs our SCS management services, and she provides management and financial consulting to municipal and private clients. This includes revenue sufficiency evaluations, rate studies, feasibility studies, and scenario modeling to help municipalities properly fund their solid waste and recycling operations. But first, Michelle, let's start with you. You provide a wide range of sustainable management and financial consulting to municipal clients throughout the U.S. So you get a chance to see firsthand how different parts of the country are being impacted or reacting to things like the China sword or COVID-19, revenue constraints from changing collection and disposal operations. So I'm really curious, from where you sit, how do you view the current state of the recycling industry, and what do you see as some of the macro and some of the micro trends that are occurring, and how municipalities are really reacting to that?
Sure, Bob. Well, I'm happy to say that recycling is not dead. And although many programs have suffered the impacts from the China sword and our worldwide pandemic, for the most part, programs are alive and well. Many of the programs have had to curtail their operations, particularly in relation to the China sword. Some programs eliminated certain materials from their collection, specifically plastic being one of them. Similarly, in response to COVID-19, some of the programs were temporarily halted as haulers experienced a loss of labor, as well as needing to revamp or implement new safety measures in their processing facilities. But we have seen most of the programs continue to operate, again, perhaps at a reduced level to some extent, but recycling is alive and well.
Michelle, you live in California, and I think California is considered progressive with respect to recycling and a lot of other things. So I'm really curious what is happening in California, and I'd be interested in your thoughts really specifically with regards to State Bill 1383, obviously, which deals with organics, and how that is impacting residential customers, and really how that's affecting our municipalities and what they plan to do, and can they do it?
Yeah, California has been at the forefront of recycling and diversion programs for many, many years, and going back to the early 1990s with our mandated AB 939 that mandated diversion of at least 50% of waste from landfills, and subsequent legislation has upped that game, and we've mandated commercial recycling, commercial organics diversion, and now we are in the process of implementing or beginning to plan for the implementation of SB 1383, which is our short-lived Climate Pollution Act, which sets a goal of reducing organics in landfills by 75% by 2025. As I said, municipalities are in the planning stages for that, and that's going to create a huge need and demand for new collection services, as well as the infrastructure to handle those materials.
Just curious, as you have been working with various municipalities, obviously the cost of these programs can be significant. Curious how clients are reacting to those costs, how they're planning for it. Are some of them kind of bucking the system, so to speak? And if so, kind of what range of cost are you looking at relative to this organics diversion on the residential waste stream?
Yeah, as I said, municipalities are beginning to plan for that, although we have seen some recent procurements incorporate the requirements of SB 1383, anticipating its implementation and enforcement, which begins in 2022. And so some of those new contracts for commercial and residential collection, we've seen increases anywhere from 40 to 60, 65% increases in the rates that customers are may need to pay or may be required to pay to incorporate the collection of organics. The law says you have to divert that material from the landfill. You can collect it separately from the other materials. You can collect it along with your green waste. There's a number of options of how to collect it. You can also collect it all together, commingled, and send it to what they call a high diversion facility that's capable of separating that material out. But again, any of those measures, collection as well as processing and the infrastructure to do that, comes at a cost, and those costs have to be passed along to the customers.
So what kind of costs are you looking at? A typical family, what are they looking at in terms of additional cost to their system if it's being paid through rates?
Well, again, we've seen some increases of 40 to 60%. So in some communities that may mean a upwards of $5 per month increase. I don't think we'll really know the full extent until the facilities and infrastructure is built to process those materials, as well as the decisions are made of how those materials are going to be collected. And obviously, those two things go hand in hand, collection methods and processing methods.
Yeah, I know you get a chance to work with a number of municipalities throughout the United States and get to see some of the regional trends that occur. And there are differences, I think, throughout the country relative to how people are dealing with recycling. We've got COVID-19, we have the China sword. So I'd be really interested from a regional perspective, as you look kind of going from west to east, what do you see? Well, how are people reacting? Are people, some saying, forget it? Are they saying, well, we'll just deal with it? Or what are you seeing?
Well, I think, initially reactions are always, we'll wait and see what somebody else does. But there are a number of proactive communities that are at the forefront and planning for these. When the China national sword impacted many programs, there was almost a bright side of it in that many recycling coordinators as well as processors and collectors realized we needed to change a number of things, how we're collecting the materials, more education and outreach to make sure people are putting the right materials in their container, as well as making improvements to their facilities to do a better job, a more efficient job in sorting those materials. with the pandemic, we have seen some programs that have gone back to collecting all the materials together, again, as a result of impacts on labor and also concerns about safety in the processing facilities. But I think one thing that's come out of these situations is that we're beginning to look at, the infrastructure in the United States to process recyclables. We've seen a number of paper mills coming back online, or the development of new paper mills, for example. And I think that this is an opportunity for the United States to develop the infrastructure to handle these recyclables ourselves, and perhaps contribute to our economy in terms of labor and jobs and just economic development overall.
I don't know how good your crystal ball is, Michelle, but as you look out in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, do you have any observations or predictions as to where we might be relative to this? Because I look at I've been involved with the municipalities as well, and I've worked with some that have curtailed significantly their recycling programs, some that have canceled their recycling programs, some that have been shocked by the increased cost when they've had to go out to rebid on their programs. What do you see? Are there any major trends that we need to be thinking about or seeing or considering?
The recycling industry has always been a cyclical industry. And if you go back 50, 100 years, you'll see, similar patterns of, markets fluctuate all the time, just like they do with any commodity. And that's what recyclables are, a commodity. So we'll continue to see those fluctuations. Again, I think that we're going to see more emphasis on waste reduction and the reuse of materials, and more emphasis on sustainable materials management. What can we do with these materials before we send them to a landfill? And also new technologies to process materials, as well as to take advantage of the inherent energy in our municipal solid waste to create renewable energy from solid waste as well.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Let's kind of transition over to Vita, if we could, and talk about some municipal financing issues, and specifically, Vita, some of the tools that you've developed to help municipalities evaluate, I think, this pretty fast-changing landscape that Michelle has talked about. You use an approach called scenario modeling to provide a planning tool, to your municipal clients to help them understand how revenue changes or changes in expenses impact their rates that they need to implement to fully fund their solid waste programs. Can you walk us through what scenario modeling is, how it works, and maybe a demonstration?
Yes. You mentioned earlier having a crystal ball, and I think that's a big part of the difficulty in planning, is that no one can say for sure what's going to happen this budget year, and particularly right now with there being a pandemic along with changing markets. There's a lot happening that's very hard for anyone to say, here's what we're doing next year or in 3 years. But there is the ability to test various scenarios and a utility's sensitivity to those outcomes. What happens, if we are not receiving as much commercial waste as our landfill? What happens if we stop serving this kind of customer? And so what we provide is financial modeling that allows you to test those different scenarios and to come to what you think is the most likely outcome or the most favorable financial plan given the circumstances that you feel you'll be dealing with. And it probably is best if I actually show you a financial model. It will make a lot more sense regarding what I'm talking about. This is a revenue sufficiency model for a client. There's a lot going on here, so I'll show you what we're looking at. What it does is projects over time your cash flows, the amount of cash that you have coming in, or the revenue stream, and the expenses and capital costs that you have. And then what we're really watching is this fund balance graph here on the upper right, that these green and yellow bars represent the amount of money that you have available. And the red line is minimum working capital reserve target, minimum amount of money you want to have in each year to be able to continue to operate throughout that fiscal year. And what we can do is make different rate plans, basically increases to the rates to allow for different strategic initiatives. In this case, the client was very concerned with having sufficient funds transferred into their closure and post-closure reserves for some of their nearer term closure projects, also to project out into the future and make sure they would still have enough at the time that they would enter into post-closure. Their immediate goal over the next 10 years was they needed about $3.8 million in that reserve account. And at the rate they were going, contributing only $75,000 a year, they were only going to get to about $1.8 million. So what we did is tested the impact of a sufficient amount, which ended up being about $325,000 on their rates. So now we can see that getting close to that 3.8 million, which changed. The yellow ones have stayed the same. That's letting us compare scenarios side by side. But you can see we're pretty much down to our working capital reserve target in many of the years in this projection period. So that doesn't allow them to really go any lower than the expected rate increase, which is on the high end for what the council would be willing to accept. They get closer to 3.5% to 3.75% would be ideal. So the next thing we looked at is they fund their capital spending for vehicles in each year, cash funded based on the actual equipment they need to purchase in that year. And we suggested that they maybe create a vehicle replacement reserve and transfer an even amount each year into that reserve. And in the years where they have greater expenses, they can just pay for it out of those reserves and basically incur an even level of spending in each year as far as their cash flows. When we did that, we see that the fund balances are looking a little better. And one of the things you might not have noticed is that there was a green bar over here in this bottom left graph that represented borrowing. And in this latest scenario, that borrowing is now gone entirely. So we've reached a plan where they not only have better fund balances, but they don't have to borrow. And this would be ideal if they were okay with 4.5% rate adjustments. But in this case, the council would rather incur the potential for some borrowing in the out years, but be able to lower the need for rate adjustments in the near term. So we can actually take this need for rate increases down to about that 3.75%. Now you see we're still pretty much right at our minimum working capital reserve target, and we do have some borrowing, but we've now gotten to where we have a need for rate adjustments in each year that are more inflationary-like and that the council would be more likely to accept and implement. So this is just an example. I mean, there are obviously a lot of different scenarios that you can test regarding things like Michelle was talking about, diversion or the costs of processing recyclables or offsetting revenues from the sale of those recyclables. But it just gives you an idea about how you can actively, while you're working with the client, be able to test some of those different things. Because we are in such an uprooted environment right now, that's really basically the way to help people plan.
So in terms of one of the big issues with respect to recycling sometimes is revenue. In fact, that when they had these initial contracts, they had situations where they're getting money back. Well, in many places, they're not getting money back and they're having to pay. So does your modeling allow for that kind of adaptation or that type of scenario where either you're getting less revenue or in some cases getting more revenue, and how that affects the overall?
Yes, it does. And I'll share my screen one more time. One of the things we do a lot of times in meetings with the key decision makers is we want to ask things on a high level, and we may not know what budget line items are going to be affected. But what happens if, the effects of this pandemic continue and we come in $200,000 less of our revenue target than we thought we would be this year? What does that look like for us? So what we can do in that case is, this is in millions, but I can say, all right, what if in 2021 I received $200,000 less in revenue than I had anticipated? In that case, it doesn't do much. But what happens if it continues and every year that revenue stream is lost to me? Now you see a bigger difference where now I can't meet my minimum working capital targets in every year, the projection period. So in this case, I would now look at what's the minimum level of rate adjustments I would need to be able to bring myself back up to those financial metrics that I'm looking at. And so we can test any kind of revenue or expense change. We can test changes to capital spending. Anything really is, if it's a number, we can change the assumption there, including even just growth in population or changes in some of the interest rates in the near term for borrowing. There are a lot of things that we can help our clients test.
So over the last 5 months during this pandemic, what have you been doing? And what are some of the creative things that you've been doing to help clients deal with this tsunami that has really come across their beaches?
We've been doing two things. First of all, we've become part-time counselors, and I have clients who call me to say, I need you to talk me off the ledge. And we talk through their realistic scenarios. I mean, we had a plan for you. We just met a few months ago. That plan is no longer valid. How do we now adjust our outcomes to be able to explain to our council or our commission that these initiatives in the future still need to go forward? But for now, here are the adaptations we've made to continue to exist in this near term. And then maybe for the 3 to 5 year plan, here's what that looks like. Implementing these changes that we know need to happen in the system later on, here's what our longer term financial outlook will look like. In not every case are we even doing the financial analysis up front. I mean, we've been offering just free chats with our clients to just sit down and have a video call like this and talk through your situation. I've had clients recently ask to have a call with me just to talk about whether they were doing as much as they could or should be relative to what we see in other utilities like water and wastewater, or relative to what we're seeing right now in other solid waste utilities. Just going through how have they changed their operations, how are they funding capital right now, have they changed their staffing or vehicle replacements. So some of it's just conversations, and some of it's a micro analysis to say, we're not projecting that this pandemic effect is going to go on for 10 years, but in that 2 to 5 year term, maybe we need to make some significant adjustments. Can we just do a quick back of the napkin, help me figure out how to get me through this budget year and maybe next budget year? And then let's reconvene and talk about some of these other strategic initiatives that we want to implement, but we just can't do right now. That lets them go before their elected officials with a plan that has not gone away, but with those adjustments to be able to cope with everything in the near term.
Well, that's excellent. Michelle and Vita, really appreciate you taking the time today to kind of walk through some of the major issues that our clients are facing relative to recycling, both on just the practical side of processing the materials, the volume of material that's coming out. And I think one of the more interesting things that has happened from this, I'll call it the Amazon effect, which is we're getting lots of things delivered to our doors. And so there's a whole bunch more cardboard. I know from my own 96-gallon recycling container, it's all cardboard basically. And I think we're seeing that in the industry. I think I've just read some recent articles on that subject in terms of the positive impact is that we're really making use of that material, and it is being recycled. I've been involved with a couple of projects that really that's been the major revenue source associated with the materials that they're pulling out. So again, thank you so much. There's some exciting things happening that we can help clients with. And so I hope everybody's enjoyed this webinar. It's been informative, and we hope you have a good day. Thank you.